What if your entire life and every success, every setback, every coincidence was following a pattern you've been setting without knowing it? Neville Goddard once said, "Dare to assume you are what you want to be, and you shall become it." But have you noticed how often people assume the worst and then call it reality? This hidden code of assumption isn't hidden because it's secret. It's hidden because most people are using it unconsciously. It works whether you believe in it or not, whether you use it carefully or carelessly. For centuries, we looked outward for truth. We searched in rules, in rituals, in systems, but Neville taught that everything happening out there is a reflection of what is accepted in here, within your own consciousness. Your assumptions, not your wishes, not your words, are what shape your life. What you accept as true, even quietly, becomes your experience. This video will show you what assumption really is, not a passing thought, not blind hope, but a shift in identity, a quiet inner decision that says, "This is who I am now," even before anything on the outside confirms it. You'll see why feeling is not something to wait for but something to generate. Why imagination, when fused with emotion, creates results, and why your current reality is not final, only familiar. So ask yourself, what have I been assuming about myself day after day without ever calling it a choice? Because that's the code, and once you see it, you can change it. Let's start from the beginning. Not the beginning of time, but the beginning of your world. Not the world out there, but the world you wake up to each morning. The one that moves when you move, changes when you change, and mirrors whatever you've accepted as true. Neville Goddard said, "Man is all imagination. God is man and exists in us and we in him. The eternal body of man is the imagination, and that is God himself." This is not a poetic statement. It's not philosophy. It is a statement of structure, of how reality forms. The foundation of what we're calling the hidden code is this. Imagination is the creative power and assumption is its law. Whatever you persist in imagining when with feeling becomes your experienced reality, not through luck, not by chance, but by law. But here's the key. Imagination is not something you only use when you close your eyes. It's not limited to a vision board or a short nightly session. It is active every moment of the day, shaping, constructing, and selecting from infinite states of possibility. The hidden code is always running, not because you turned it on, but because you are it. Now, most people imagine without awareness. They assume things unconsciously, based on past experience or collective belief. They imagine failure the moment they try something new. They imagine rejection before speaking. They imagine disappointment, struggle, or limitation, not because they want to, but because it feels familiar. And yet, this too is the law in motion. What's repeated inwardly with feeling must appear outwardly with form. You don't get what you want. You get what you are conscious of being. This is why Neville said, "Dare to assume you are what you want to be, and you shall become it." It's not a trick. It's not wishful thinking. It's not pretending. It is the act of embodying the state you desire. Not later, not eventually, but now, even while the outer facts still appear unchanged. Let's look closer. If you assume that you're unworthy of success, you'll find evidence everywhere to support that claim. Not because life is cruel, but because life must match the self you hold within. You may think, "I'm trying to change, I'm working hard to improve myself, I'm thinking positively." But if the underlying assumption remains, "I don't have what it takes, I'll never get there," or "this probably won't work," then all efforts serve that deeper blueprint. In truth, you're not living your life. You're living your assumptions. Every conversation, every relationship, every result you experience is a reflection of the self you are assuming behind the scenes. This is why Neville emphasized the phrase, "Consciousness is the only reality." There is no power outside of consciousness, no event, no person, no system that operates independently of your awareness of being. Your world, as you know it, is your consciousness made visible. You are the projector, and life is the screen. What's showing up out there began in here, not an hour ago, not yesterday, but in countless quiet moments where a state was assumed and left undisturbed. Consider this. A person who feels overlooked may begin to see evidence of being ignored, not just once, but again and again. They may enter new environments, meet new people, yet the pattern repeats. Why? Because the assumption hasn't changed. Even when something positive occurs, it's filtered through the lens of disbelief. The old state overrides the new circumstance, and so, The world must echo the assumption until it shifts. Now notice something else. When you assume something deeply, not mentally but emotionally, the outer need to try disappears. The effort fades because there's no longer anything to reach for. You're living from it, not toward it. Neville often illustrated this with the analogy of radio frequencies. You don't create the music on the airwaves. You simply tune to the station. Likewise, you don't force reality into place. You shift your inner state, and reality begins to arrange itself to match that new signal. But this tuning doesn't happen with words alone. It happens with feeling. A felt assumption is what enters the subconscious, and once it enters there, it begins to operate automatically. So ask yourself, not in theory, but in quiet honesty, what have I accepted as true of myself over and over, even without meaning to? Not what you tell others, not what you post online, what you assume in those private, unguarded moments, when things feel uncertain, when you're alone with your thoughts. Is it, this always happens to me? Is it, I don't have what they have? Or is it, I am already it? I am already there. I am already the one I've been searching for? That quiet statement, whichever one you live in, is the code. Neville never taught techniques for technique's sake. He didn't offer formulas to manipulate reality. He pointed again and again to the self, the I am, and said, claim it, and do not waver, because the world has no choice but to follow. In every moment you are assuming something about yourself, and the world without hesitation reflects it. The question is no longer, will this work for me? The question is, what am I accepting as true, and do I want to keep living from it? That is the foundation, and when that shifts, everything shifts. You may think the world needs changing, but Neville said, the world is yourself pushed out, and if the world is yourself made visible, then to change the world, you must change the self you are assuming. This is not a surface shift. It's not about saying new things or behaving differently while carrying the same inner dialogue. It's about changing the invisible script you run underneath every word, action, and reaction. So here is the turning point. Listen to yourself, not to the voice you use when others are around, but to the one that speaks when you're alone with your thoughts. That subtle commentary, the one you don't even question. That is the voice of assumption. Do you hear, it's always too late for me? Do you hear, people like me don't succeed? Do you hear, maybe this will finally work? Quietly followed by, but probably not. These are not passing thoughts. These are unconscious affirmations, repeated with emotion and accepted as truth. They form the foundation from which your life unfolds. And this is where the law of assumption becomes more than just a tool. It becomes the explanation, not for why you feel stuck, but how it's been working perfectly, based on what you've assumed to be true. Neville didn't speak of trying. He spoke of claiming. He said, claim it, assume it, sleep in it. Because what you claim in imagination, you begin to animate with life. You think from it, not of it, and the state becomes natural, inevitable. This is not about forcing belief. It is about feeling into a new identity. If you assume poverty, not just financial but emotional or relational, your world reflects lack. If you assume abandonment, you notice evidence of it even in neutral situations. But if you begin to assume love, wholeness, peace, then those qualities begin to organize themselves into form, and it does not require convincing anyone else. Your world moves according to your assumption, because your consciousness is the only reality. So listen closely to your inner speech. Do you argue for your limitations even when life offers you something better? Do you imagine rejection before it happens and call it realism? Or do you quietly rest in the feeling of the wish fulfilled without needing permission? Neville said, all transformation begins with an intense burning desire to be transformed. But desire alone is not enough. The assumption must be lived in, mentally, emotionally, imaginally, as if it were already so. This is not daydreaming. This is inner discipline. It's the decision to hear a new voice within, and to let that voice define your reality. The mind wants proof, but assumption offers something deeper than proof. It offers alignment, and once you align with a state inwardly, the facts must follow. So again, listen. What tone is running in the background of your life? Because that tone is not harmless. It is law. And the state you assume is true, not once but repeatedly, becomes the structure of your world. You don't need more effort. You need new inner agreement. And that begins with real attention. not to what the world is showing you, but to what you've been telling yourself beneath the surface. Noticing this is the beginning of change. Persisting in something new is how the change becomes visible. Every assumption has its own world, and the world you experience will always match the one you live in, within. Before we continue, pause and consider this. If your entire life is shaped by what you assume to be true, what happens when you start assuming deliberately, consciously, with precision? There's something waiting in the pinned comment, something that will help you see how easily the shift can begin. It's not theory. It's a direct extension of what you're hearing right now. When you're ready, check the pinned comment. You'll understand why it matters. Now let's continue. There is no outside cause. That's the part most resist. It seems too simple, or too confronting, to believe that what happens in the world is not created by chance, by others, or by fate, but by what is accepted within. Neville made it clear: change your conception of yourself, and you will automatically change the world in which you live. No effort to move the pieces on the board. No striving to persuade others or rearrange circumstances. The movement happens inside. The outer world adjusts itself according to your inner state. As within, so without. Not as a metaphor, as a mechanism. You do not attract what you want, you attract what you are. And what you are is not determined by appearances, titles, or conditions. It is determined by your inner assumption of being. To assume is not to pretend. It is to select a state of consciousness and to occupy it, to think from it, to move as though it were true. And when you persist in that state, your outer world has no choice but to reflect it. You don't need to be seen differently by others. You need to see yourself differently, and persist in that vision until it replaces the old identity. If you assume lack, you see it everywhere, even in abundance. If you assume unworthiness, you find rejection in places where none exists. But if you assume fulfillment, even small events begin to confirm it. The shift in perspective begins to rewrite experience. This is not an abstract philosophy. It is precision. You can test it, you can verify it, not with force, but with quiet interchange. Let's look at it plainly. You've seen people walk into a room and receive warmth, attention, respect, not because of what they wear or say, but because of something they carry. And you've seen others, equally capable, walk into the same room and be overlooked. Why? The difference is not out there. The difference is the state they occupy. One assumes they belong, the other assumes they don't, and the world agrees with each. Neville described the states of consciousness as infinite. They exist now, not in the future, but here, awaiting occupation. You do not create the state, you enter it, and by entering it, you bring its consequences to life. Every state has its own script, its own outcomes, its own rhythm. You can shift from fear to confidence without changing anything externally, simply by refusing to return to the old reaction. The state does not resist you, it welcomes you the moment you accept it. So ask, what state am I reacting from most often? Not what do I want, but what do I currently feel to be true? Because no change is possible until the state is seen for what it is, and no transformation lasts unless the new state is assumed and sustained. The outer world cannot outgrow the inner one. Circumstances follow belief, not the other way around. Neville didn't tell you to fight with appearances. He told you to ignore them, to withdraw attention from what denies your desire and to place full attention on what confirms it, internally, in silence, in feeling. Because the outer world is not final, it is responsive. And every change begins where few are willing to look, in the hidden realm of your assumptions, in the unseen space of inner selection, in the quiet decision to dwell in a new state, not tomorrow but now, as within, so without. This is not a phrase, it is law. There is a silent language deeper than thought, older than words, more direct than logic. Neville called it feeling, and he said, without hesitation, feeling is the secret. Most people believe they think their way into results. They recite, repeat, affirm, but the results remain the same. Why? Because the feeling behind the words hasn't changed. The emotion, that deep inner acceptance, still reflects the old identity. You may say, I am abundant, but if the feeling beneath it is strain, doubt, or effort, the deeper message is heard, and the world responds not to your words but to your vibration, the inner mood you carry even when you're silent. Feeling is not a byproduct, it is the cause. Neville explained that every imaginal act must be accompanied by a corresponding feeling. Without feeling, There is no seed. With it, the seed is planted, nourished, and destined to grow. He wrote, "Catch the mood of the wish fulfilled and sustain it, not once, not just for a moment in meditation, but as a steady internal presence, a tone you carry without needing to explain." This is why the assumption of the wish fulfilled must feel natural, not forced. You do not force a state into being. You relax into it, you soften into it, you become familiar with its feeling tone until it no longer feels like pretending. It feels like remembering. And what you feel deeply, the world mirrors. Let's take this further. Neville spoke of the emotional body as the creative womb. Imagination is the father, the initiator. Feeling is the mother, the receptive magnetic force that brings forth form. When you unite an imagined scene with its natural emotional response, you have conceived. And from that moment, something begins to take shape, not through effort but through spiritual gestation. It moves toward you through what Neville called the bridge of incidents, a path of events, often unplanned and unexpected, that leads from the unseen to the seen. But the bridge cannot form if the assumption is abandoned. If the feeling is not sustained, the state dissolves, and you return to the old pattern. This is why emotion matters. Not emotional drama, not intensity, but inner conviction, the quiet knowing that you have entered a new state and are willing to remain in it, no matter what appears to oppose it. Neville often gave this instruction. Feel the relief, the satisfaction, the gratitude of already being the one you wish to be. Even if your outer world still looks the same, that feeling is the signal, and life responds to it with precision. You can test this. You've already done so. Think of a time you feared something deeply, and it happened. Now think of a time you felt relaxed, confident, at peace, and without trying, things unfolded beautifully. The common thread is not the situation, but the state. The law doesn't reward anxiety or reward effort. It reflects feeling. So the real question is never, how do I get what I want? It is, what does it feel like to already be it? Not just in words, but in breath, posture, tone, and silence. Because once that feeling becomes familiar, the world must conform, not because you chased it, but because you assumed it, and lived from it with no need to prove it to anyone. Creation does not happen in time. It happens in rhythm. Time is what the senses measure. Rhythm is what consciousness moves by. Neville said, "Imagination creates reality, but what follows is just as important." He said that once a state is assumed, life moves in a rhythm to fulfill it, not randomly, not hurriedly, but with perfect order. This is where many begin to doubt. They imagine once, they feel the state briefly, and when nothing seems to happen the next day, they assume it didn't work. But creation is not instant in the way the mind expects. The world of form operates on a rhythm, not a stopwatch. Just as a seed planted in the ground does not bloom overnight, your imaginal acts unfold in their own season. Neville called this the bridge of incidents, a sequence of events, some seen, some invisible, that begins the moment you assume the state of the wish fulfilled. The outer world shifts, people move, circumstances rearrange, not to test you, not to trick you, but to carry you toward the thing already assumed. And yet this rhythm requires one thing above all: persistence, not effort, but stability in consciousness. You hold the state. You return to it, even as appearances tempt you to react. When Neville imagined success, he did not look to his bank account for proof. He rested in the feeling of being successful, and the rhythm took care of the rest. He did not try to make it happen. He assumed it was already done, and allowed the movement of life to draw him into alignment with it. It's like music. Once you catch the melody, you don't force each note. You follow the rhythm. You move in time with something already unfolding. But what disrupts this process? Doubt, interference, the habit of checking, comparing, adjusting, and reacting to the outer world. These are signs that the inner assumption hasn't fully settled. Neville warned that every time you return to the old state, the state of not yet, the state of questioning, you delay the rhythm. It's like digging up a seed to see if it's growing. Faith means remaining in the feeling, even while nothing visible confirms it. He said, "The drama of life is a psychological one, and the whole of it is written and produced by your assumptions. That means your only real task is to maintain the assumption, to remain loyal to the unseen until it becomes seen. And that loyalty is rhythm, not force, not demand, but harmony with the state already accepted. If you feel discouraged, it is only because you've returned to the rhythm of the old self. The solution is not to work harder but to return quietly to the mood of the wish fulfilled. Feel it again, not for results, not to make something happen, but because that is who you are now. And in that rhythm, the bridge is built, the path appears, the outcome emerges, not because you made it happen, but because you refused to stop believing it was already done. Every event in your life is a harvest, not a punishment, not a reward, a direct result of a seed, an assumption that took root in consciousness and matured into experience. Neville said, "Whatever you assume to be true becomes your reality. This is not a belief system. It is a principle, just as constant as gravity. You don't have to believe in it for it to function. You're using it whether you realize it or not. To understand this, look not at what you desire, but at what continues to show up. The assumption always precedes the result. If you assume difficulty, life becomes a series of locked doors. If you assume things work out for you, you find help, timing, and clarity where others see only confusion." This is why Neville reframed the law of cause and effect. He said the true cause is not in the world, not in circumstances, not in actions, but in assumption, and the effect is what shows up as the shape of your life. The law works with perfect neutrality. It does not moralize, it does not interpret, it reflects. You may say, "I want success," but if you assume it will be delayed or difficult or always just out of reach, then those are the conditions you will meet. Not because you're undeserving, but because the assumption was more honest than the desire. Desire without assumption is like light without heat. It has the shape, but not the power. Neville did not teach desire alone. He taught identification. He said, "You must assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled until your assumption has all the sensory vividness of reality. This means becoming so familiar with your chosen state, wealth, love, freedom, peace, that it no longer feels foreign. It becomes ordinary, natural, obvious. And what feels obvious to the inner world becomes visible in the outer. To say, you reap what you sow is to say, you experience what you assume. But most are sowing unconsciously. They assume fear and wonder why chaos appears. They assume lack and hope for abundance. They assume separation and search endlessly for love." Neville reversed the entire approach. He said, "Change the cause, change the assumption, and the world must yield to the new pattern. This is not magic. It is not control. It is alignment. To reap something new, you must assume something new, and stay there, not with strain, not by force, but with the quiet decision to stop returning to the old identity. The results will come. They must. But the result is not your confirmation. The assumption is, the world does not change first. The self does. And the world, being a faithful servant, follows." Neville taught that creation happens through the union of imagination and feeling. Imagination is the initiator, the masculine aspect. Feeling is the receiver, the feminine. Together, they conceive the state that will later appear as your world. A mental image without feeling remains abstract. A strong emotion without direction becomes scattered. But when you imagine clearly and feel it to be real, a seed is planted in consciousness. Neville wrote, "Imagination and faith are the secrets of creation." Faith here means emotional acceptance. The state is not forced. It is lived inwardly with calm certainty. The moment you feel your imagined scene is true, conception occurs. What follows is not your responsibility to control, only to remain loyal to the feeling of the end fulfilled. This inner union is not poetic language. It is the way all things are born, silently, lawfully from within. Neville taught that scripture is not history. It is psychological truth clothed in story. Every character, every event, every parable reveals a movement within your own consciousness. He said, "The Bible is the greatest psychological book ever written. To read it literally is to miss its power. To read it symbolically is to unlock the states it describes. The crucifixion is not an external event. It is the death of an old identity. The resurrection is the rise of a new assumption, accepted as real. The Red Sea parting, a symbol of leaving behind bondage, the former self, and stepping into freedom through belief. The mustard seed is not a plant. It is a faint but steady conviction, which when persisted in, grows into full expression. The prodigal son is the story of forgetting who you are and remembering. Each verse points inward. Each miracle describes a change in consciousness. When Neville said the Bible was your autobiography, he meant that every line is already being lived. not in ancient lands, but in the landscapes of your thoughts, your assumptions, your inner speech. The power of Scripture lies not in memorizing it, but in recognizing yourself within it. You are not a reader of sacred stories. You are the one they describe. The kingdom of God is within you. Neville returned to this statement again and again, not as metaphor but as instruction. He insisted that heaven is not a destination after death, but a state you enter through feeling and awareness. To dwell in the kingdom is to assume the state of wholeness here now, regardless of appearances. It is not earned. It is not given. It is recognized. Neville said, "Prayer is the art of assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Not pleading, not hoping, but shifting inwardly to the end already realized. That movement of consciousness is entrance into the kingdom. Peace, fulfillment, security. These are not things to chase, but atmospheres to embody. And when you do, the world bends to match. You are not waiting to be chosen. You are selecting a state, and in doing so, you claim what has always been yours. The gate to the kingdom is perception, and the key is assumption. I am the light of the world." To Neville, this was not a religious claim. It was a statement of fact about consciousness itself. Light is awareness. It is the knowing that gives life to everything observed. You are the one who illuminates your world by the attention you give to it. Whatever you shine awareness on, you bring into focus. Whatever you withdraw it from, fades. This is why Neville said, "You become what you behold." Not in theory, but in experience. When you fix your attention on lack, you animate it. When you attend to abundance, peace, or wholeness, you bring those states to life, not by wishing, but by being the light that reveals them. You are not the object of life. You are the observer, the chooser, the light itself. To let your light shine is not to impress. It is to remember that awareness is always creative and always selecting. The quality of your attention determines the quality of your world. The Beatitudes are not rules for behavior. They are descriptions of consciousness, portraits of the inner states that produce outward harmony. Neville taught that each beatitude represents a level of identity assumed by the individual who recognizes their divine nature. "Blessed are the meek," he said, refers not to the timid, but to those who assume their desires quietly, with confidence that does not require noise. The meek inherit the earth because they no longer fight with appearances. They rest in the knowing that assumption creates reality. "Blessed are the poor in spirit" does not praise weakness, but surrender. Those who let go of egoic striving, who stop clinging to personal will, become open to the awareness of I am as their true power. It is in that emptiness that fullness begins. "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness" speaks to those who desire alignment, not with doctrine, but with the natural order of being. They assume the feeling of being right with themselves, with life, and with their chosen state. And that feeling satisfies more than anything outside could offer. These are not emotional highs or religious ideals. They are vibrational positions, assumed within and expressed without. Each one is a door into a higher self, not to be earned, but to be inhabited. To live the Beatitudes is not to act holy. It is to dwell in the states they describe, with quiet, inner certainty, and from those states life reshapes itself. Neville taught that you are not shaped by the world. You are shaping it. Every condition in your life is the reflection of an inner state, accepted, repeated, and assumed as true. You may believe you are reacting to life, but you are always responding to your own assumptions. Change the assumption, and the reaction disappears. No matter how convincing the outer world seems, it is not the cause. It is the result. And when you realize this, the struggle ends. You stop trying to fix the reflection and start choosing the image. You are not a passive effect of what has been. You are the active cause of what becomes. And the moment you fully accept that, everything can change. If something in you was stirred by these words, and even slightly, check the pinned comment now. Don't hesitate. There's something waiting for you there.